The Anomaly, Tensura X Data Live, by Nocturne_Chapter 26. Return to Origin. Rimuru Pav. A few minutes before the spacequake struck, Rimuru was still adrift, floating aimlessly through an endless, weightless void. Her mind wandered in circles, trapped in this liminal space. It felt like she's been stuck here for an eternity, even though she knew time didn't flow the same way in this strange dimension. Just when she was about to resign myself to boredom, CL's voice suddenly chimed in, sharp and clear within my mind. Report. Rimuru-sama, I have devised a method for your escape. There was something in her tone, a subtle hint of amusement buried beneath her typically serene composure. That could only mean one thing. Wait, what? You've already figured it out? Rimuru asked, disbelief coloring her voice. Indeed. I have been aware for some time now. CL's calm reply was infuriating, to say the least. CL, why didn't you tell me sooner? I've been floating here, doing absolutely nothing. I wished to observe how you would handle the situation on your own. Her voice remained perfectly composed, though Rimuru could almost feel her smirk. I should have known. Sometimes I think you enjoy watching me suffer, Rimuru muttered. That would be incorrect. Despite her words, there was a playful undercurrent in her tone that Rimuru couldn't ignore. She sighed, letting go of her annoyance. All right, how do I get out of here? I will now explain the method for your escape, Rimuru-sama. I will utilize the essence of Yog-Sothoth, CL stated with matter-of-fact precision. Ah, of course. The power of Yog-Sothoth, an ancient, otherworldly force that could manipulate time and space. Rimuru had already known about it, considering it was one of her own abilities, but she hadn't thought to apply it here. Great, let's do it. Wait, hold on a second. How long have I actually been here? Rimuru asked, a sudden wave of curiosity hitting her. In objective time, approximately 37 seconds. CL's response hit her like a brick. Wait, what? Only 37 seconds? It felt like hours, Rimuru spluttered, utterly bewildered. She had been adrift for what seemed like an eternity, and yet, just seconds. Time is relative in this space, CL replied with her usual detachment. Rimuru groaned, about to comment on the absurdity of it all, but CL's tone shifted slightly, bringing me back to focus. However, Rimuru-sama, you should be aware that during this time, you have been unconsciously causing disruptions in the physical world. Disruptions? Rimuru frowned. What do you mean by that? What did I do? Your power has been leaking beyond your control. Small spatial anomalies have manifested on the surface world, including the appearance of minor craters at night and the defeat of spirits after their manifestation via Megiddo. Rimuru blinked in confusion. Wait, hold on. I was defeating spirits? Without even being there? Indeed. Your subconscious use of Megiddo has been triggered several times while you were confined. In times of stress, your latent abilities seek out disturbances in the physical realm and neutralize them. Rimuru stared blankly into the void. I caused. What? How? Your power occasionally acts independently when you are in certain states of stress, Rimuru-sama. Without your awareness, it has influenced the world outside. Her explanation was both thorough and concerning. Rimuru could feel a pit forming in her stomach. CL, why didn't you stop me earlier? It was an excellent opportunity to measure your influence on the outside world. Her tone was as infuriatingly calm as ever. That is not the response I was hoping for, Rimuru groaned. Initiating time reversion now. Before Rimuru could argue any further, reality itself began to warp around her. The familiar sensation of CL tapping into the essence of Yog-Sothoth overtook her, and suddenly, time felt like it was pulling me backward. Stars and endless space blurred into a swirling vortex, and she felt her very being twisting through the fabric of time. It was like being caught in a current, dragged out of an ocean Rimuru hadn't even realized she was drowning in. A moment later, Rimuru was thrust back into reality with a jolt. The ground shook violently, a deafening roar filling the air as she opened her eyes. To her shock, Rimuru found herself standing at the center of a massive crater, the devastation unmistakable. The power of Yog-Sothoth had returned her, but it had also unleashed something catastrophic. The sky above crackled with energy as the aftershocks of the spacequake rippled through the area. Rimuru stared at the destruction in awe, her mind struggling to catch up. Well, that could have gone smoother. I must apologize. The spatial distortion caused by your return was slightly more intense than anticipated. Ciel's voice was as calm as ever. Slightly, as Rimuru stood there, surveying the aftermath of her chaotic return, she noticed someone approaching. The air around them was thick with a dark, unsettling energy. Rimuru's eyes focused, and she immediately recognized the figure. It was Origami, but not her usual self. This was her inversed form, radiating an ominous, powerful aura. Instead of feeling troubled by her appearance, excitement surged through Rimuru. After being stuck in that endless void for what felt like ages, the prospect of a fight was more than welcome. Her muscles tensed with anticipation, eager to shake off the boredom that had clung to her like a fog. Origami's expression mirrored her own, her gaze intense, as though she, too, was ready for a fight. Rimuru couldn't help the smirk that spread across her face. Finally, something interesting, she muttered to herself, her eyes locking onto hers with a sharp, focused intensity. Without even realizing it, Rimuru's battle instincts kicked in. She could feel the thrill building inside her, as if every fiber of her being was itching to move. Her gaze sharpened further, and the space between them seemed to crackle with tension. However, in Rimuru's excitement, she failed to notice something, or rather, someone else. Unbeknownst to her, Shidu and the other spirits were nearby, watching the scene unfold. But at that moment, all her attention was fixed on Origami. Shidu paused inside Fraxinus. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with the weight of the destruction unfolding on the massive screen in front of them. The control room buzzed with frantic energy as everyone watched the violent clash between Rimuru and Origami unfold in the massive crater below. Even from this distance, the shockwaves from their battle could be felt reverberating through the control room structure. Shidu stood at the front, his eyes focused on the screen. His expression, however, wasn't one of shock or confusion like the other spirits. He seemed troubled, more than anyone else. Kotori, standing next to him, noticed. Her sharp gaze flicked from the screen to her brother, narrowing as she picked up on the subtle tension in his demeanor. Shido. She began, her voice low, "You know something, don't you? About that spirit?" Kotori asks. Shido's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond immediately. Rain, her calm voice breaking the silence, leaned forward. "We've detected significant power surges from that spirit. Her energy output is off the scale, and it's fluctuating as though she's barely exerting herself." Her eyes, half-lidded and unfazed, moved to Shido. "If you know something about her, it might be time to tell us." Shido exhaled slowly, his eyes not leaving the screen. "Her name is Rimuru. She's a spirit, but not from this timeline. She's from the original timeline." At this, Kotori's eyes widened slightly. She remembered Shido's earlier explanations about the original timeline, about certain events that had been altered. Rimuru was one of the certain events that had been altered. The other spirits, however, were visibly confused. "Original timeline?" Toka asked, frowning. "Shido, what does that mean?" Before Shido could explain further, Kotori intervened, her eyes still narrowed in suspicion. "We'll explain that later, Toka. What matters now is that this spirit, Rimuru, is on an entirely different level. This isn't just any spirit, and judging by Shido's expression, we can assume she's not here for a casual chat." Kanazuki, still watching the screen with fascination, nodded, though his lips curled into a grin. "It's true. The way she's moving, it's like she's playing with her opponent. Even with an inverse spirit, Rimuru isn't taking this seriously at all." On the battlefield, the clash was nothing short of cataclysmic. The crater in which Rimuru and Origami fought had become a war zone, the ground beneath them obliterated with each strike. Dust and debris swirled around them, but within that cloud of chaos, the two spirits danced through the storm like titans of destruction. Rimuru moved effortlessly, her katana glinting in the fractured light. Her strikes were fluid, almost lazy in their execution, yet each one carried devastating force. Every time her blade met Origami's cannons, shockwaves rippled out, carving deeper into the crater. Yet, for all the destruction, there was a casualness to Rimuru's movements, as if she wasn't even trying. Origami, on the other hand, was cold, calculated, and relentless. Her expression was blank, her eyes devoid of any emotion, as if the battle meant nothing to her personally. Multiple cannons floated around her, firing in synchronized barrages, each shot aimed with mechanical precision. The cannons unleashed a relentless storm of energy, the air vibrating with the sheer power of the blasts. But no matter how much firepower Origami brought to bear, Rimuru dodged and deflected with almost mocking ease. The two moved like storms colliding, the crater beneath them barely able to contain the sheer force of their battle. With each swing of Rimuru's katana, the ground split open, sending cracks spider webbing through the earth. Her movements were fluid, almost playful, like a predator toying with its prey. In contrast, Origami's attacks were precise, her cannons raining down energy with terrifying intensity. But even as the energy beams scorched the ground, leaving molten craters in their wake, Rimuru never faltered. "Is that all you've got?" Rimuru smirked, her voice carrying through the chaos like a challenge. She spun on her heel, her katana cutting through the air in a wide arc, sending a wave of energy straight toward Origami. The force of the slash tore through the ground, creating a shockwave that sent dust and debris flying. Origami responded with a barrage of cannon fire, her expression unchanged. The beams collided with Rimuru's attack, and for a moment, the entire crater was engulfed in a brilliant explosion of light and energy. The shockwave from the collision shook the earth, sending tremors through the ground that could be felt for miles. The crater deepened, its edges crumbling under the sheer force of their battle. Yet, when the dust cleared, Rimuru stood unharmed, her katana resting casually over her shoulder. She looked almost bored, though the glint in her eye betrayed her excitement. "Come on, Origami. I know you can do better than that." Origami's cannons adjusted, glowing with an ominous light as they prepared to fire another volley. Her expression remained emotionless, her movements precise. She unleashed a new barrage of energy, each beam more destructive than the last. But Rimuru barely blinked, her body moving with fluid ease as she dodged and weaved between the attacks. With a flick of her wrist, Rimuru's katana deflected the incoming blasts, each deflection sending another shockwave rippling through the ground. She closed the distance in an instant, her blade slicing through the air with impossible speed. Origami barely managed to block, her cannons spinning into position to intercept the strike. The impact sent a shockwave through the crater, the force of the collision pushing both spirits back. Still, Origami's expression never wavered. She fired again, the cannons unleashing another barrage of energy. But Rimuru merely smirked, disappearing in a blur of motion before reappearing directly in front of Origami. Her katana came down in a swift, precise arc, forcing Origami to block once more. The force of the strike sent a tremor through the ground, the crater growing deeper with each clash. From the control room in Fraxinus, the others could only watch in stunned silence. Katori's eyes were glued to the screen, her hand tightening around her armrest. "She's toying with her," she muttered. "This isn't a fight, it's a game to her." Shidu could only watch, his heart pounding. Rimuru wasn't taking this seriously at all. And yet, despite her overwhelming power, Origami showed no sign of emotion, no sign of fear. The battle continued to rage, the ground trembling beneath their feet as the two spirits clashed again and again. The crater grew deeper, the sky above darkening as the power of their battle distorted the very air around them. Rimuru moved with the confidence of someone who knew they couldn't lose, while Origami's cold, mechanical precision gave her an almost unshakable aura. But it was clear to everyone watching, Rimuru was holding back. And if she decided to go all out, the consequences could be catastrophic. On the battlefield, the storm of destruction continued. Origami's expression remained unchanged, her face a mask of cold indifference. Despite being outmatched, she didn't falter, she adjusted her cannons, unleashing another volley of concentrated energy toward Rimuru. The blasts were stronger this time, the sky above crackling with the intensity of the power she was channeling. But Rimuru didn't waver, she simply smirked, her sharp gaze locking onto Origami. With a flick of her wrist, she deflected the incoming attacks, sending shockwaves rippling through the crater. "Come on, Origami," Rimuru called out, her voice carrying over the sound of the blasts. "Is this really all you've got?" Origami remained silent, her eyes glowing with a cold, emotionless light as she summoned more cannons to her side. They hovered in a perfect formation, their tips glowing with ominous energy. Without hesitation, she unleashed her strongest barrage yet. A massive storm of energy beams converging on Rimuru from every direction. For a moment, it seemed as if Rimuru would finally be caught in the onslaught. The sheer number of blasts was overwhelming, each one powerful enough to obliterate a normal spirit. But Rimuru didn't move to dodge. Instead, she raised her katana, its edge gleaming with a strange, otherworldly light. With a single swing, she cut through the barrage, her blade slicing cleanly through the energy beams as if they were nothing. The force of her strike created a shockwave that dispersed the remaining energy, leaving the battlefield momentarily silent. Origami's eyes widened, just slightly, the smallest hint of surprise crossing her usually emotionless face. But she quickly recovered, her cannons recharging for another attack. Rimuru, however, seemed to have grown tired of the game. Her smirk widened, and the air around her shifted. Her power spiked, a wave of energy rolling off her in waves. The ground beneath her feet cracked under the pressure as she took a single step forward. "This has been fun, but it's time to end this," Rimuru said, her tone playful but carrying a deadly edge. Origami's cannons hummed with energy, preparing for one final, massive attack. The air around them crackled with tension as Origami brought all her power to bear, her cannons glowing brighter than ever before. With a single, emotionless gesture, she unleashed her strongest attack, a massive, concentrated beam of pure energy that tore through the air, aimed directly at Rimuru. For a brief moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Rimuru's eyes narrowed, her grip tightening on her katana. The energy beam raced toward her with terrifying speed, but Rimuru didn't flinch. Instead, she raised her blade, channeling her own energy into it. In one swift motion, she brought the katana down, slicing through the beam with a blinding flash of light. The impact was immense. The ground shook violently, the crater deepening as the shockwave from Rimuru's strike tore through the earth. The beam of energy split apart, dissipating into the air like smoke. Rimuru stood unharmed, her katana gleaming in the aftermath, while Origami's attack faded into nothing. The silence that followed was deafening. Origami's cannons flickered, their energy depleted. She remained standing, but it was clear that she had exhausted her power. Rimuru, on the other hand, hadn't even broken a sweat. She rested her katana on her shoulder, her smirk returning. "You're strong, Origami, but not strong enough to beat me," Rimuru said, her voice calm. With that, Rimuru turned her back on Origami, her victory clear. The battle was over. In Fraxinus, the control room was silent. Everyone stared at the screen, stunned by the display of power they had just witnessed. Shido exhaled, his heart still racing. "Rimuru," he muttered under his breath. Rimuru paused. The battlefield was eerily quiet after the chaos. Origami lay on the ground, her powerful form now unconscious and still. Rimuru's angel faded away, dissolving into thin air as she glanced down at Origami with a sigh of disappointment. "Well, that was underwhelming," Rimuru muttered, running a hand through her blue hair. Despite the fierce clash, she hadn't even broken a sweat. "But still, you gave me something to pass the time, I guess." Her gaze softened slightly as she acknowledged Origami's effort. Just as she was about to turn and leave, a familiar voice echoed behind her. "Rimuru, is it really you?" Shido stood a few feet away, having teleported down from Fraxinus. His expression was serious, eyes searching Rimuru for answers. He had recognized her immediately during the fight, but a part of him still needed confirmation. Rimuru turned her head towards him, a playful smirk dancing on her lips. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Miss Me," Rimuru said, taking a step toward him. Shido remained quiet for a moment, absorbing the situation. Despite her playful demeanor, there was something about her presence that felt distant, even if she tried to lighten the mood. Shido shook his head slightly, recognizing that the Rimuru here is the real one. Still, seeing her after all this time, alive, powerful, and as enigmatic as ever, left him both relieved and on edge. "You haven't changed much," he muttered. "Neither have you," Rimuru shot back, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Rimuru's playful smirk faded as she straightened up, her demeanor shifting to something more serious. She glanced down at the unconscious Origami before turning her attention back to Shido. "Shido, I assume you're planning to seal her spirit powers, right? You know what that means." By kissing her, Rimuru said, her playful tone dropped. Shido's face flushed slightly at the bluntness of Rimuru's words, but before he could respond, a soft sound interrupted them. Origami stirred, her eyes slowly opening as she regained consciousness. The fierce, cold expression from her inverse state was gone, replaced by wide, tear-filled eyes. She looked disoriented, vulnerable, and she was crying. Origami, Shido whispered, stepping toward her. Origami, now fully aware of what had happened, couldn't hold back her sobs. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to compose herself, guilt and pain etched into every feature. Itsuka-kun, I'm so sorry, she choked out, her voice trembling. Without hesitation, Shido knelt beside her, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. It's okay, Origami, I'm here. It's not your fault. You don't have to carry this alone anymore, he reassured her softly. Origami looked at him, still trembling. But, I hurt people. I lost control. Shido shook his head, leaning closer. I'll make sure you never lose control again, he said firmly, his voice filled with determination. You won't have to fight this on your own. Trust me. As she sobbed quietly, Shido leaned in and kissed her gently on the lips. A soft glow surrounded them, the familiar power of his sealing ability activating. The destructive energy that had consumed Origami slowly faded away, her spirit powers sealed once again. Rimuru, who had been watching the scene unfold, wrinkled her nose in mild disgust. I forgot how cheesy you can be, Shido, she muttered under her breath, turning her head away slightly. She crossed her arms, averting her gaze from the tender moment between the two. Despite her words, there was a small smirk on her lips, as if amused by the whole situation. Well, at least that's taken care of, she muttered to herself. As Shido stood in thought after Rimuru's words, the air around them began to shift unnaturally. The sky above flickered and shimmered, as if the very fabric of reality was being distorted. The once calm battlefield where Origami lay unconscious started to ripple, waves of energy radiating outwards. The world itself seemed to be unraveling and restitching, like an ancient tapestry being rewoven into its original form. Rimuru's expression shifted from calm to focused as Ciel's voice echoed in her mind. Report. The timeline is reverting to its original state, Rimuru-sama. The current deviation is correcting itself. Rimuru glanced around, noticing the subtle but rapid changes. The landscape, once scarred from her battle with Origami, was slowly restoring itself, piece by piece, like someone was resetting the world back to its intended form. As you have returned to this timeline temporarily, the reversion will not permit your continued existence here. Your body is beginning to phase out as a result of the temporal correction. Looking down at her hand, Rimuru saw her form start to fade, growing more translucent with each passing second. She could feel it, the pull of the original timeline, calling her back, even though her presence here was being erased. Shido, noticing her form flickering, took a step toward her, his eyes wide with confusion and growing worry. Rimuru, what's happening to you? He asked, his voice edged with panic. Rimuru looked at him, her eyes calm and filled with confidence, a slight smile playing at her lips. It's fine, Shido-kun, she said, her tone light despite the seriousness of the situation. I'm just returning to where I belong. But, Shido's gaze darted between Rimuru's fading form and the chaotic world around them. You're disappearing. How can you be so calm about this? Rimuru chuckled softly, giving him a knowing look. I still exist, just not here. It's complicated, but this isn't goodbye forever. Her eyes gleamed with certainty as she met his gaze one last time. See you soon, Shido. With that, Rimuru's body continued to dissolve, fading into the shifting ether of the changing timeline. Shido reached out instinctively, but she was already gone, her presence reduced to a shimmer of light as the world around him finally restored itself to its original state. Shido stood there, staring at the spot where Rimuru had vanished, his heart heavy with confusion and unanswered questions. But something in her final words gave him hope. Shido paused. Shido awoke with a start, his heart pounding as the memories of Rimuru's disappearance and the strange distortion of the world came rushing back. His room was quiet, the soft light of morning filtering through the blinds. For a moment, he wondered if it had all been a dream. The battle with Origami, Rimuru's cryptic farewell, the world shifting around him. But something deep inside told him it was all too real. Without a second thought, Shido threw off the covers and rushed out of his room, his feet carrying him towards the spirit house at full speed. He needed to know, was Rimuru still here? Did she really vanish, or had she returned somehow? Bursting through the front door of the spirit house, Shido found Toka, Yoshino, and Natsumi sitting together at the dining table, their faces frozen in shock as they turned to look at him. The Yamai sisters, Kagaya and Yuzuru, were lounging casually on the couch, locked in a heated video game match, oblivious to the tension in the room. Shido, why are you up so early? And why did you come running in here like that? Toka exclaimed, her wide eyes filled with surprise. Yoshino blinked, equally startled, while Natsumi raised an eyebrow in suspicion. What's the rush, Shido? Natsumi asked, her voice laced with curiosity. Shido struggled to catch his breath, glancing around the room. His heart raced even faster now. He was about to ask if they had seen Rimuru when the sound of soft footsteps on the stairs caught everyone's attention. Yaon. Shido's eyes darted to the staircase, and his breath hitched in his throat. There, descending the stairs casually and yawning with her hand covering her mouth, was Rimuru. She looked completely relaxed, her usual aura of playful confidence hanging about her. She was still here. Morning, Rimuru mumbled, rubbing her eyes as she greeted the room with a sleepy smile. She didn't seem fazed at all, as if everything that had happened, the battle, the timeline shift, her disappearance, had been nothing more than a distant memory. Shido stood frozen for a moment, unsure whether to feel relief or confusion. The spirits around him shared similar expressions of surprise, and for once, he didn't have the words to explain what he was feeling. Toka, Yoshino, and Natsumi stared at Rimuru, then back at Shido, clearly just as bewildered. Shido, what's going on? Toka asked, her voice soft and uncertain. Shido met Rimuru's gaze, and for a brief second, he saw that familiar glint in her eyes. Whatever had happened, whatever the future held, she was here, at least for now. Rimuru. Shido began, his voice still shaky. But before he could say anything more, Rimuru flashed him a knowing smile and tilted her head playfully. Shido-kun, you look like you've seen a ghost. ... Just as the room settled into a comfortable chatter, the front door swung open once more, and in walked Kotori. She paused mid-step, her eyes widening as she took in Shido's disheveled pajama attire, still wrinkled from sleep. Shido. Kotori exclaimed, her hands on her hips, a playful scowl forming on her face. Are you serious right now? Running around in your pajamas like this? What kind of bold activity are you up to? The light-hearted tone in her voice made it clear she was joking, but Shido couldn't help but feel a tinge of embarrassment as he rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. He stammered, but Kotori waved him off, cutting through his fluster with her characteristic straightforwardness. Enough about that, she said, turning her attention to Rimuru, her expression shifting to one of seriousness. Let's get straight to the point. Who are you really? The room fell silent as everyone focused on Rimuru. The playful demeanor she had shown moments ago shifted slightly, replaced by a contemplative look. Shido felt a wave of tension wash over him as he glanced around at the others, noting their curiosity. Yoshino tilted her head in confusion, while Toka and Natsumi exchanged glances, remembering the earlier confrontation. The Yamai sisters paused their game, now fully invested in the conversation. Rimuru, sensing the weight of the moment, smiled lightly. I'm just a spirit, like all of you, she said, but her eyes held a depth that suggested there was more to the story. Kotori wasn't satisfied with that answer. You know what I mean, Rimuru. You showed incredible power back there, way beyond what we've seen. We need to understand where you fit into all of this, especially after everything that happened with Origami. Shido felt a knot form in his stomach as he anticipated Rimuru's response. Would she share the truth about her origins, or would she keep them in the dark? Before Rimuru could answer, Shido's mind drifted back to the chaotic events that had unfolded. The timeline had shifted, bringing about confusion and destruction, but now it seemed that everything had returned to normal. Origami was now free from the burdens of the fight and the influences that had distorted her actions. As he stood there, surrounded by his friends and a newfound ally, Shido realized that this moment felt monumental. The world was back in its original state, it was a chance to start anew. Rimuru met Shido's gaze and offered a reassuring smile, one that suggested she was aware of the burden he felt but confident in what lay ahead. With the atmosphere shifting toward the unknown, it was clear that their adventures were far from over. End. Chapter 26.